lived here all. But my dad's father came from England. My grandmother came from Dummer, and I'm sorry to have to admit that there's an entire possibility that I might be related to Harold Kidd.
Just a minute, there's smoke coming out of the camera. Just a minute.
My grandmother was a kid who came from Dummer. But my grandfather came from England, and he was killed in the First World War. Now, we never had very much information about my grandmother, about my grandfather. I know my grandmother used to correspond with people by the name of Mason. Now, I wanted to tell you that I'm winging it tonight, and I've been winging it all my life, but at the end of the evening, you'll know that I've done that all my life when I really didn't have to do it. So I'll explain that to you a little bit later. But we never had any real information about my grandfather, except I remember my grandmother writing to people in England by the name of Mason. And we have some pictures. There's a picture of my grandfather's sister. If you want to just pass it around, she's got long, long hair. Her name is Emmeline, and they lived in a little community called Belchamp Walter in England, and we had a hard time finding out where that was. Maybe Mike might know. It's up near Sudbury, north of London. And my grandfather's sister played an organ in a church up there, and she's buried in the church cemetery there. But anyway, we didn't have very much information, and after my grandmother passed away, there wasn't any communication at all. Well, first of all, I should tell you that my wife and I went to Israel, and when we were in Israel, there was a group of us went, and there was a lady from Georgetown who was with us. And after we came back, we had different get-togethers. And one time when we got together, she said that she'd been at a church meeting in Georgetown, and she met a lady by the name of Wingett. And she spoke to her and said, oh, I know people by the same name. Oh, she said, that wouldn't be the same name. Wouldn't spell it the same. Yes, spell it exactly the same. So anyway, her name was Margaret Wingett. So this lady, what's her name, Fran, contacted us and told us about her. And my daughter contacted her. And then she replied saying that she didn't know very much about the Wingetts, but her husband's cousin, Tony, was researching the Wingett family. So my daughter, who's got a computer and all the other modern equipment, well, all I've got is a telephone, and that's all I want. She started contacting Tony Wingett, and he was researching the family. So he went to London. What do they call the place in London where you find the families?
Oh, well,
Anyway, he tried to find Leonard Charles Wingett, and he couldn't find any information about Leonard Charles Wingett. And I should just mention that we have a copy of a birth certificate. My grandmother had it for a Leonard Mason, who was born on the 31st of October, 1877. And that was the same birth date as my grandfather. Well, anyway, he couldn't find any information about the Wingetts, not Leonard Wingett anyway. So then about 4 years ago, just out of the blue, Len got a letter from a lady from Gillette, Pennsylvania, which is just almost at the New York border, saying, and I guess she found the info through the telephone internet directory. She looked up Ontario and found Len's name, which is the same as our grandfather's, and she wrote him a little note saying that her great-grandmother had told her that she had a brother whose name was Leonard Wingett, and that he'd come to Canada and that he'd gone back over in the First World War, and he'd been killed during the war. So immediately we got in touch with our daughter, and she got in touch with that lady, and so she gave us a pile of information about my grandfather and his family. I can't remember where my mind was going there. Oh, I know I wanted to say, and we met her just this summer. It's the first time we've ever met any relatives of my grandfather's. Never ever knew they existed. So she came to Belleville to my daughter's last summer, and we all met her there. But anyway, she told us that, at least informed my daughter, she phoned her and said, I just wanted to let you know that my great-grandmother, who was a sister of your grandfather, told me that your grandfather had apprenticed as a printer, and he didn't like it very well, and he was probably maybe only in his early teens. So apparently he left the printing, which was a very serious thing apparently in those days. If you walked away from an apprenticeship, you were in trouble. So the only thing I can figure out that he was a bit of what's the word? Rebel, and maybe that's why he came to Canada, but he changed his name to Wingett. So I have to admit that if I was choosing a name, I'd much prefer Mason. And our granddaughter, who's adamant that we should be changing our name. But anyway, I'm pretty well stuck with it now, so we'll have to put up with it. So, in actual fact, our name isn't Wingett, and I didn't have to be winging it all these years. I could have been building as a mason. We found out a lot of information about my grandfather's family. There were 7 or 8 brothers and sisters. Some of them went to New Zealand and Australia, but this particular lady came to Pennsylvania, and that's where she settled. So that's the story about my grandfather. But I just wanted to share with you some things that maybe I might mention first. My daughter and son-in-law went to France. My grandfather is buried in Vis-en-Artois, which is north of Paris, about an hour and a half north of Paris. There's a real good picture of the cemetery on the board over there. It's about, I think, 10 miles out of Arras in France. It's north, about an hour and a half north of Paris. And my daughter took some pictures. That's the church in Arras. It went through 2 world wars, and you can see a lot of bullet holes in it. But she's got some pictures of the cemetery, and that's what's written on the thing. And she's got my grandfather's grave there, and that's a picture of her by the grave. So maybe you might want to look at those pictures a little later. There's some there on the board too. Now I've also got a letter. My grandfather was in the 93rd Battalion, and I don't know, maybe some of the older people would remember hearing of the 93rd Battalion. The Legion has a long picture taken in front of the arteries in Peterborough, and we've got one at home of the 93rd Battalion. And my grandmother used to talk often about the 93rd. And so-and-so was in the 93rd. And so-and-so was in the 93rd. And old Mr. Miller, who lived up where Buttles lived. You know where the Buttles?
Bus station. My mother was raised there.
Okay, well, old Mr. Miller was in the 93rd, and he was in the 93rd with my grandfather. And I can remember, having worked at the funeral home, that whenever a member of the 93rd Battalion died, if there was any survivors around here, they were always there. And they always sent flowers. And one person in particular who was always there was Mr. Selkirk, remember Mr. Selkirk that had the menswear store in Peterborough? He was always there if anyone from the 93rd died. I have a letter informing my grandmother of my grandfather's death. I don't know where it is here. Some of these things, he was killed on the 27th of August, 1918. And I've got a letter here that he wrote to my grandmother on the 22nd of June, 1918, and I wondered if I could read some of it, but I don't think I will. To tell you the truth, even though I never met him, it kind of really touches your emotions when I read about it. He talks about his boys. He hadn't seen them in a long time and wondered how they were. I'm longing to see the boys, dear, as they must have grown quite a lot, and I shall not know Willie. Willie was my Uncle Bill, and he just died 2 or 3 years ago, and his wife just died a month ago. But that's a letter, you might want to look at it. It kind of brings tears to my eyes, but the other thing I thought that might be interesting, got a letter that my grandmother received on February the 12th, 1919. The children of a deceased member of the forces will be entitled to allowances as follows. The first child gets $12 a month. The second child, $10 a month. The third and subsequent children, $8 per month. Now that doesn't seem like very much money, but I guess we have to remember that was back in 1919. So you might want to look at that. I don't know whether there's anything else here that. Oh, and this is some. These are some greeting cards that were sent back and forth by my grandfather's brothers and sisters, sent to my dad and his brothers. I'll just set it over there, and you might want to take a peek at it after. They're quite different. You know, from the cards we get today. But I also noticed in the back of it here something, this is an advertisement from Peterborough. Oak Hall, the one-price closiers. Peterborough, Ontario, corner of George and Hunter Street. Never heard of them. But, so you might want to look at that. I have a recommendation here that was given to my grandfather. I don't know what it was for, but the bearer, Leonard Mason, has been a pupil in this school during the past 7 years. He has been under my personal supervision during the past 3 years. I was always found him a very willing and obedient boy. He is honest, truthful, and very punctual. He passed the 6th standard examination conducted by HM Inspector Mr. Singer, here on the 19th, 20th, and 21st. And also, there's a thing here from Associated Portland, the cement manufacturers. And I don't know, this is December the 8th, 1904. I'm not sure whether my grandfather came and worked in the first cement plant that was built here. I don't know. Anybody know when that was built? Like the plant that's here now was built later, but there was one previous to that. But this is a letter saying, I have pleasure in stating that L. Wingett, now his name's changed to Wingett from Mason, has been employee at the above works as house attendant for the past 6 years. He has proved himself to be a very steady, sober, and industrious workman. And during the above period, he has carried out his duties to my entire satisfaction. So I don't know whether that's a recommendation to come here or not. I don't know what year he came to Canada. Well, I think that's all I've got to share with you. Is there anything I've forgotten, man?
Look it over again.
So, we were quite intrigued to,
There were 3 brothers. The one you talked about
father was one killed in 1931?
No, I didn't talk. Oh, yeah, well, my father, there was 3 brothers in my dad, well, a girl who died at 18 months. And my dad had 2 brothers, and one of them was killed at the cement plant over here in, was it 31? He was 20 years old on the 24th of May, and all that, but my dad told me that he went away that weekend. When he come back, his brother, he was electrocuted on the electric shovels. They had electric shovels there, and it wasn't working, and he was repairing it, and the fellow operating it, he thought he had turned the power off, and he hadn't. So that's all I've really got to share with you. Thank you very much for your patience. Maybe next time, if you want to look at any of these things, they're all here, that you might find them interesting, and you might not. Thank you.